Research shows the happiest people on average are actually 60 and older. This, of course, debunks a common myth that our later years are gloomy and joyless. Joining us now to share some of her research on the role of happiness as we age is UWF Communications Professor, Dr. Athena du Pre. Good morning, Athena. We're so excited to have you.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, of course, your topic is incredibly interesting. You're here to talk about happiness.
Yes.
So why is this topic just kind of fascinating?
Yeah, I got involved with it. I'm a communication professor and researcher, and I'm a humor researcher. And so I was studying humor in health settings and humor in quality of life and play, and it's a very short jump to happiness. And it turns out that we started in the last 10 years or so to really research happiness a lot. But before that, ironically, I think we sort of considered it not that important, and it turns out to be immensely important.
Well, how did you kind of fall into this research, and how did you fall into it?
It was really sort of a happy snowball effect of starting with one thing and ending up with something else. And happiness to some extent is a communication phenomena, but not entirely. But what we found is that I was studying things like health and leadership and relationships, and happiness just starts to emerge as one of the most important things in all of those categories and others. And so now when I teach leadership, I say part of leaders' job is to promote and enhance happiness. And there's some real advantages to that. It's not just sort of a, oh, isn't that sweet kind of thing. It ends up affecting a lot of things.
Right. And of course, in your research, you've told me before that surprisingly, folks 60 and older have been sort of deemed the happiest. How's that happen?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But we actually conduct happiness indexes now. They're conducted around the world, every age, every type of thing. And I often, when I speak about happiness, I often quiz people. You know, I give them age ranges and who do you think is happiest? And they very seldom choose 60 and over. And indeed, the research is really conclusive that 60 and over are happier than other ages. And I think partly a lot of people haven't gotten there yet. So they're speculating, and the media doesn't present that as the happiest age. So there's a lot to look forward to.
Well, and so really it is a myth that this notion that after you're 60, it's just a gloomy process of decline.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just not true.
Right. And what we find, too, is that teenagers and young adults are not very happy, and that's also, it's kind of a myth, too. You know, I teach university-level students a lot, and so I often say to them, like, don't worry, if you're not as happy as you think you should be, you're not there yet. You know? And I often say that I'm happier than you are, and I love college. But really, it gets better, and it's kind of a shame.
Well, I'm sure, too, since you're studying happiness all the time, that probably contributes to your happiness.
It helps. I've learned some good tips for this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, is there sort of an age range that you have found in your research that is the unhappiness?
Yes.
Unhappiness.
Yes, there's clearly an unhappy age range, and it is middle age. And we think that's because, you know, we look at correlations. It's hard. It's easy to ask people, how happy are you? And we get these great indexes. It's harder to ask somebody, why are you happy? Because it turns out we don't understand this very well ourselves.
Right.
When you ask people what makes them happy, it turns out we're kind of wrong about it a lot of times. But we can run correlations, and we can see that probably in middle age, as you might anticipate, people feel a great deal of stress and pressure. Responsibility is the highest, and we think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, and that ties into my next question. What does contribute to your personal happiness?
Oh, it's a great question. And one of the great things to start with is what doesn't. And it's funny, I often have people create a happiness to-do list. And then as we talk more about the research, they are changing their list. So the things that we think might make us happy, like losing 30 pounds, winning the lottery, getting a promotion, all of those things, turns out mostly it's a very, very fleeting effect. The research shows that almost nothing makes us consistently happy or unhappy for more than 90 days.
Oh, wow.
And so it's good news and bad news. You know, the bad things don't last long.
So if I went out and got a brand new car,
it would
no effect.
It would very little, very, very little.
Right.
And so it turns out to be really the little things that we don't even put on our list. You know, we're always gearing up to, I'll be so happy when I graduate, or happy when I do this or that. And it turns out to be the everyday things. So the happiest people really look for great things. They kind of make it a habit to do that, which turns out, we think, to affect their body chemistry and their brain chemistry. And so it sort of becomes self-fulfilling. It becomes a habit, but also becomes a physical thing. So things like being in nature, being around loved ones, meditating, being kind to others are some of the greatest predictors.
Paying it forward.
Paying it forward.
Yeah.
You know, getting a good night's sleep. They're
gosh,
really.
We all need that.
Don't we? Yes.
Well, and you know, all this research sounds really fantastic and interesting, but does it really matter? At the end of the day, does it really matter?
It turns out to matter a great deal. And one of the ways that it matters is in our performance. So one of the reasons that I talk about this a lot is for workplace performance and leadership. John Aker's done this fabulous research. He has a book called The Happiness Advantage, in which he shows that we're about 30% more creative and more innovative and more collaborative when we're happy. And so that 30% is really large. We find a few other things that have that immense impact. So it matters in the workplace. It matters personally to us. People who consider themselves happy typically experience less pain, perceive themselves to be happier, even live longer, and have better relationships.
Right, and that was actually tying into my next question too. How does it impact your health as well?
Yes, what we're finding are fairly consistent correlations between that. And what we're also finding too, this is really interesting that people don't guess, is that about 50, sometimes 60%, depending on the research, of happiness is really personal to you. So we know that there are happy people and there are unhappy people. And
sometimes you can tell who the unhappy people are.
And it seems to be true. We find that the happy people can undergo really some horrendous life events and still on average be happy, and vice versa can happen as well. So,
and I would imagine it's also important to surround yourself with that tight-knit circle of friends that do, you know, convey some of those happiness factors that we need as well.
Absolutely. Have wonderful friends. Show pictures of yourself smiling. We find that to be very self-persuasive.
Wow.
If you look happy, if you look at your pictures and you seem happy,
so all those selfies really make a difference.
The selfies are good.
Yeah, great. Well, then I should have this under control. But what can we control as far as our happiness goes? Sometimes we know there are circumstances we're not going to be able to avoid. Life happens. So what can we do to kind of keep that happiness going?
You know, focus on the day-to-day, not so much on the big things. Realize the big things take a lot of energy and there's not a whole lot of impact from them, actually. And so the day-to-day things, journaling, especially journaling about things that went well for you that day. I've known people who've said, once they saw this research at the dinner table with their kids every night, they said, what are you grateful for today? And the second question was, what did you do that was kind today? Get in the habit of thinking about those two things. Nature, around the world, contact with nature is one of the greatest predictors of happiness. The happiness cultures spend a lot of time outdoors. They bike and walk a lot, and we find that that's no coincidence.
Well, and I'm guessing there's some science behind that I wouldn't understand, I'm sure. But this is such a great topic, and I can imagine a lot of folks are going to be interested in learning more. What resources are available for them to learn more? Who can they contact if they need more information?
Certainly, they can certainly contact me, but you can also start with some great things that are easy to find. There are TED Talks online. If you go to TED.com, look up Dan Gilbert. He has The Surprising Science of Happiness. Sean Aker, it's A-C-H-O-R, has The Happiness Advantage. Dan Buettner talks about blue zones. Blue zones are zones in the world where people live much longer than average. Turns out they're also much happier than average. And so you can start with those TED Talks. And each of those that I just mentioned are also books and research as well.
This is such an interesting topic. I wish we had 30 more minutes to talk about it, but we really do appreciate you coming on the show this morning.
Happy to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.